What's your advice on how to determine like what is the best fit for me?
Whenever a company or people team is a shift to more product-led practice in the people function, it's always like, okay, first and foremost, what exists now? What's the state of readiness internally for change? What's the state of readiness at an executive level for change? Like, there's all sorts of things that need to be considered when it comes to the application. I don't think, and I want to be very clear on this, I don't think there's a one size fits all or one single best solution. I think what sits at the heart of it is why, in the first place, are you interested in shifting to this way of working? Is it because it's a cool thing to do and you want to talk about being a people product team? Or is it that you actually want to drive value for the business? You want to, as I've learned to describe it in a true product sense, do you want to solve employee problems and drive business growth? Is that what you want to do? Because if that's what you want to do, whatever we call it and however you structure it becomes secondary to, okay, what do you now need to know then? And what are the capability gaps and operational shortfallings in how you currently work that stop you from solving real employee problems and driving business growth? And I think that's the really important step back before you start thinking about how to do it, what we call ourselves, how we structure the team fundamentally.
You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy. Luke, welcome to the pod. We've been calling you Luke, my homie, for the last 8 months. I finally got some clarity around how to actually say his name, Stephen. It's Omani, like Armani. I'm never going to forget it now.
I like that. And Daniel's underplaying that. It's more like 3 years or so long as our paths have intersected. But I feel like this is a long time coming. So super excited to have you.
Oh, I love that. I'm okay with Oma Homie, by the way. I quite like that. It's strong. I jazz it up a little bit. Armani with an O is how I describe it. But yeah, it's an Irish surname, so it's O'Mahony. But who's got time for that, really?
I like the elevated version of it.
Me too.
So we start every podcast with good news stories. Could be anything that's coming up for you. It could be personal. It could be work related. And we'd like for our guests to go first. So if you have anything, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, lots going on, really. I think the most recent work thing was the Immersive PX event in London a few weeks ago. That was about a week and a half ago now. So awesome just to get PXs and people obsessed with this stuff from around the world into a room for 2 days. So that's been a super highlight. And I guess an extension of that is it's at the start of this year, my wife joined me in the business full time. So it was the second event we've delivered end to end together. So just super special to share those moments. And outside of work wise, I was just saying to you, Daniel, I used to be an avid distance runner and long distance triathlete. And since second child came along, I've not done a lot of it. But I've got my first half marathon coming up for probably 4 years since I did my last one on Sunday. And I'm feeling very fit, very fresh, like I can run a PB. So watch this space. But yeah, lots of cool stuff going on.
I think you're going to break your PB. You said 1:20, right?
That's what I'm hoping for, yeah. I'm definitely fit enough. Cardio-wise, there's no problem. It's just how my legs feel on the day. We shall see, because I've got a decent amount of miles.
It's like, did you get enough sleep? Yeah.
Yeah, the sleep thing's massive, as you know, with children.
Yep. Stephen, I can go next. So we've always been pretty good about managing our money in the bank at the Modern People Leader, but we've never had a ton of money in the bank. So it's always...
Daniel, we're not supposed to share that, bro. We honestly don't care.
And for the first time ever, I think we have something like 8-9 months runway. I didn't do the math. I haven't looked at our spreadsheet that shows that in a little while, but I logged into our Chase account earlier to help Regina, one of our employees, out with something. And I was like, oh, we got money in the bank. We have some decent little runway, and it feels good. So that's my good news.
I love that for you guys. Tell me how, please.
That'll be another podcast.
Fleeting.
We'll
it's fleeting.
Fair,
it comes and then it goes very quickly. My good news, well, my computer came back to life. My computer went into full lockdown mode. We're starting this about 20 minutes late. And so I'm glad that I thought for a minute that we were going to have to reschedule, honestly. And so I think that's my immediate good news. I'm going to go personal. So for our listeners, it's not news, but I have a baby boy coming in hot this summer. I co-parent 2 teenage daughters. And so I've been a proud girl dad and a little frightened by becoming a boy dad, but his latest check was this morning. Looks great. Baby looks great. Heart rate of 133, which according to her is good. I have no idea what that means, but that's the best news for me this morning.
Little Joaquin coming in hot.
It's
like
coming.
What, 2 more months?
2 more months, not even. Well, yeah. Just like we're at like 2 months away if everything sticks to schedule. But as y'all know, that rarely happens. So
yeah,
well, that's super exciting. I'm excited. That's awesome, man. Yeah, likewise, dude. That's awesome.
So Luke, as we were saying, we've known of you and known you for, well, I've known you personally for probably like a year and a half, and we've been doing, I don't know, like a quarterly catch up. And I don't know why we didn't have the idea of bringing you on sooner. I guess in my mind, like I was thinking of you as like a peer in the space doing something similar that I really enjoyed meeting up with once a quarter and just chatting about life, about the business. And so, long way of saying this is way overdue, but I want to hear your story. It's been a while since I heard the origin story for PX Espresso and SapientX. So yeah, where did this start? And yeah, and how has that evolved over the years? I was thinking back to something that David Hanrahan said at MPL Live Austin last year. He very smartly predicted that the future of performance management would be powered by AI in real-time data. And I remember at the time immediately thinking, like, what does that even mean? And the way that he described it was, instead of relying on annual reviews, he envisioned tools that surfaced insights instantly. So pulling from real conversations, projects, and day-to-day work. Fast forward to today, and that now exists with Topic Flow. Topic Flow was built by the same team behind 7 Geese, just reimagined with an AI native approach. Their platform connects to the tools that your people use like Salesforce and Jira, and brings coaching and feedback into the flow of work inside the tools that you're in every day like Slack and ChatGPT, with no extra logins or app switching. And when it's time for reviews, all of the relevant data is automatically compiled, making reviews and calibration fast, fair, and grounded in real work, not memory. Oh, and if you're stuck in a contract with a legacy tool, Topic Flow will buy you out, import all of your past data, and fully onboard your team at no cost. If you want to learn more about this product, go to topicflow.com/MPL to talk to their team. That's topicflow.com/MPL.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It has been a long time coming, hasn't it? I think I've I've extended the invite to you several times. They're not followed through with scheduling because I'm very infrequent with my podcast. So I'm glad we're getting to do this chat. Definitely went overdue. I think last time we had like anything podcasty was when we did that 24-hour one. Do you remember that a year or so ago?
That's right, with Jesse.
With Jesse and the whole crew. That was mega. That was the last time we did anything podcasty. Anyway, I digress. So my story, yeah, it's definitely an evolving one. So for me, I started out in more of the talent and ops side of things in solution design in RPO, which is, yeah, it's interesting, but it certainly wasn't like lighting all of my fires, but it definitely got me designing systems and thinking about how talent is really the sort of talent acquisition as a driver to scale really is an important bit to get right. Like if you can't unlock that part, if you can't connect talent acquisition to the wider business strategy, you're going to struggle to scale. So I guess that's the origins in terms of the beginnings of connecting sort of talent pipelining to marketing and that side of the business. But really my full swing into this product-led PX, as we'll get onto, was when I was the head of people myself. So I became fascinated and immersed in sort of the Agile HR, emerging Agile HR scene. People like Perry Timms. I don't know if you've had Perry on before. I'll definitely make an intro to Perry. But Perry was certainly one of the emerging leaders of Agile HR in the UK about 10 years ago. And I used to go to some of his hackathons and have a lot of fun playing with sort of product rituals and solving problems using product methodologies. And really, I was like, I should be doing that. Sales and solutions in talent acquisition is great, but really I should be in there building. And so I managed to talk my way into a startup and say, hey, I know you've got talent acquisition challenges. I can solve that for you, no problem. But here's my bigger picture vision for what we could do from a people and culture perspective. So that was in a startup in Birmingham in the UK, payment solution startup. And essentially, through naivety, I like to say, I kind of said yes to everything, which meant by the end of that role, I was operationally responsible for everything talent, people, all the things you'd expect a head of people to be responsible for, but also ops and continuous improvement across the business. I was also responsible for product marketing and GTM, marketing at an operational level, GTM contributing at a strategic level, and basically ended up having way too much going on. But as a consequence, seeing how the businesses scale from a systemic level and the core role that people and people operations plays in scaling growth, and then by natural consequence of being operationally responsible for product and marketing and GTM strategy, it was a case of stealing and layering on those ways of working and thinking and putting those more and more in the way in which I was thinking about the whole people experience, as we call it now. It wasn't really called people experience back then, but that whole concept of the experience of work and how do we enable performance, how do we unlock growth, how do we remove operational bottlenecks, and essentially applying product and GTM concept to solve those problems internally. So it was all very organic for me. And then it was only when I left that role and I started to share those experiences on LinkedIn that I found there's an emerging community of others that were doing something similar. So Jessica Zwaan being a prime example. I think her original blog post was really on the rise as I started to talk about my application of product, which was great. So again, it was a case of, hey, you're doing this, I'm doing this, let's have a conversation and see where we go. And from there, sort of network and community of product-minded people experience designers has kind of evolved over the last 3 or 4 years. So SapientX is my vehicle for that now. It's sort of a platform of content, courses and community, essentially to enable that next generation of people profession that is people first and product led. And I can drill down into as much of that as you want to, but that's kind of where we're at.
Love that story. I hadn't heard that because I'm not part of the quarterly catch-up fund that you guys have. And so question, like you kind of took me down memory lane. I remember old school HR, post World War II HR that existed all the way up until like the late 90s. And I think Ulrich came around, modernized at the time HR, did some really innovative things like centers of excellence and, business partners and, essentially what I would say the majority of HR teams, how they're currently structured. And I also remember a time where, the Agile movement came around, like, in parallel with traditional HR, there was waterfall software development. And then Agile came around and just kind of revolutionized the way that people develop software. And it didn't take long for some of those principles to start kind of spilling over into other parts of the organization. And it made its way. I was always a technical minded HR person. And so when, the first kind of drop, that spilled out of the Agile software development bucket hit HR, I was like, yes, this is it. But then everyone around me was like, what the fuck is this? Like, what? This does not make sense. Like, it's about our centers of excellence and, yada, yada, yada. And so I'm just curious, like going through the story, like, back when you're with Perry and groups of other people that are like working through these hackathons, what do you think was different about kind of this iteration of Agile HR that really stuck? Because I think there were a lot of efforts and maybe it didn't fail before, but it was like a much slower and super niche movement, but something happened. And I'm just curious, like, what do you think? I eventually became an entrepreneur and started building companies. So I didn't see that phase. And, looking back, like, what do you think it was that changed the Agile HR trajectory?
I still think it is in its infancy, honestly. And despite the fact that it's been around for the best part of 15, 20 years now in a variety of capacities. But from my perspective, I guess I was in a bit of a bubble, if I'm being honest. So I'm not from a traditional HR background, as I mentioned. People like Perry was someone who fortuitously crossed my path because I wasn't a HR practitioner, but in doing my role, part of my role was to build networks of progressive thinking HR practitioners, which led me to Perry. And I was like, and then I sort of fell in love with what he was doing and what he was trying to do, and really understood why the application of Agile was a positive thing to do as it relates to people work. But at that point, it wasn't operational. So even I hadn't connected the dots really at that point. And it was only through practice that, I was able to learn through doing. So I guess I was unburdened by the legacy expectations of what HR should be, although I will, and I do talk about this a lot, I fell into many of the legacy HR traps, because when I was looking for guidance, I'd be directed to CIPD and SHRM in your case, but I'd be directed to these, big HR institutions, and then you'd get these sort of best practices and playbooks that were straight out of the Ulrich way of thinking and very, not particularly fit for purpose in a scale-up startup. So part of my answer to your question is that I was unburdened by what had gone before, so I could just forward with these more progressive practices. And to pick up on the Ulrich model in particular, I think the shift away from Ulrich in more modern people functions is really a reflection of this product mindset over, I would describe the Ulrich model as more of a procurement mindset, which is all about efficiency and how do we optimize processes to extract the most value from the resources that we are paying for. And so, that makes sense, like operationally and at scale, right? On paper, that all makes total sense and it does work, but you are not going to create a highly engaging experience of work by following that practice, because the outcome is really efficiency and optimization of the extraction of value from resources as the primary objective. That's the way I see Ulrich model. Happy to be challenged on that.
No, I think you're right. No, I think you're right. It's crazy to think when I joined Goldman Sachs in 2005, they were fresh off like a year, maybe 2-year transformation of moving from HR, literally every division, finance, operations, trading, investment banking had their own HR teams with their own HR resources, with their own tools, with their own processes. And so moving from that kind of model, which today sounds like crazy. Why would you ever set up your HR, your people team that way? But that was the way. And so when this new model came around of centralization and, alignment, it was a huge improvement until it no longer worked. And I think, you're right. There was a better way. There was like another evolution from that, as there typically is in all business things. I want to come back to something that you said before, that what you do is kind of a gateway drug to PX as a product, or PeopleOps as a product, or Agile HR. What do you mean by that?
So can I come back to that? I just want to pick up on and close off that sort of procurement thread. So I think the reason why Agile now is becoming more attractive in people functions and is having a higher degree of uptake is linked to that, because the model for Ulrich delivery of HR is waterfall. It's very project based, it's outcome based, it's like top down, here's the most optimal process you must follow. It's a very waterfall based approach. And I think the breakaway from Ulrich and that model of practice means that Agile fills a hole in a way that perhaps logically it didn't before, because Ulrich was the model and the best HR teams, in inverted commas, were operating an Ulrich model. And now very best people teams are now shifting away from that, and Agile needs to be part of that solution. Otherwise it doesn't work. And we can talk a bit more about that as we expand. But in terms of like SapientX and myself as a gateway, I think there's some incredible practitioners out there. I'll be the first to say that there's people way better than this stuff than me, like way better than me. And I've operated in a in a relatively lean environment always. So that sort of startup scale-up environment where you're very lean, teams are lean, resources are lean, everything's lean, headcount's relatively low compared to as you start to scale. So I think for me, it's important that I help people start that journey, right? And so It's not about me being the messiah of all things product as it relates to PX, because that would be ludicrous, but it is about me making it accessible, right? Because I think it can seem quite inaccessible. It's like you've got to learn a whole new language framework. You've got to start to view systems in a completely different way. And then you've got to start trying to go, okay, well, what does it actually mean to work in an agile way? And does that mean I've now got to become like an agile coach and a scrum master and stuff like that? It's like people just, I think, can get a bit lost in the technicalities. So what I want to do, and what I do hopefully through my content and everything that I create, is to make it accessible. Like, here is this product concept, here is how it can be applied to people experience and PeopleOps. This is why it's important, and this is how you can implement it in 5 steps, and this, like, strip it right back. So that's my view. Is like, I don't think we need to be an expert in all of these things, but we just need to know enough to take action. And so, yeah, for me, it's like getting as many people leaders from 0 to 1 with getting started with this stuff is a net positive. And then being a connector that goes, right, now that you've got this far, this is who you should speak to for that next stage. This is where you should go for that next level. Building out a community, as I'm fortunate to have done over the last few years, where I can make those connections and push people from one person to another when they're ready for that next level, is really cool. So that's what I mean about being a gateway. It's like, let's make this accessible. Let's get as many people leaders as we can moving in the direction of product-led thinking as it relates to their people experience work. And that will start to turn the tide a little bit, I think, in how the profession is viewed and how we operate.
I think it was Andrew Golden who, first of all, he recommended that you come onto the show. I think he was like the second or third person who recommended we have you on. But when he described, I guess, like, the people that he's going to learn more about PeopleOps as a product, he was like, Jesse and Built for People, that is like, conceptually the place that I went to learn all about, like, how to, like, what it even means to operate as a people team in a product, more product minded way. But when it comes to actually putting this stuff into practice, Luke's my guy. Luke's my homie. And so I think making it accessible is definitely what you're doing. And even on our last chat, little things like outlining the 3 approaches to product-led people work. Can you kind of walk us through these 3 approaches? And is it like it's like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 type of thing? Or how do you think about these 3 different approaches?
No, the 3 are distinct. Each have their pros and cons. So I'll walk you through those. Very kind of Andrew to make the recommendation. I saw him recently. He came over he came over to London for the most recent Immersive PX. So it was really cool to see him. I think on his point, maybe Jess and that built for people as the, like, seminal text can be seen as the Bible, and I guess it needs people like me that are the sort of pastors, like helping people turn those concepts into action. Because I don't know, that's just the analogy that came to mind. Like, you can read a Bible, but
I think
you
it's
can
a good
still
one.
you can still be lost with how to apply that to your life. And I'm trying to connect those dots. So maybe I'll write my own Bible at some point. But for now, I'm quite happy in this space. So the 3 emerging styles of product-led PX or product-led HR, however you want to describe it. For me, there's the productization of HR as a service, which is really, for me, applying product principles to the Ulrich model. So you can, again, it's moving more in the right direction, but you're just productizing HR as a service, and your service remains the core role of the HR function, i.e. it is there in support of the business rather than being a strategic driver of the business. So that's one approach, the productization of HR as a service. Again, better. It is a little bit more human-centric, people-centric. It's a little bit more iterative, but I would say it's more agile rituals applied to waterfall delivery. But that's one view. Not optimal, but it's a step in the right direction. The second emergent approach is programs and initiatives as products. So individual pieces of work that a people team delivers become products, which again is a really good step forward, because then you're focusing in on user problems, because your internal user problems and challenges, and you're building product that addresses specifically those challenges. Massive step forward. Again, very positive. You're going to create much better, higher impact, higher value, better engaged solutions for internal users. But I also think it misses a point a little bit, because it's still delivering in silo, even though you're delivering much better solutions. And then the third version, which is where I prefer to sit and where Jesse also sits, and people like Dart Lindsley. Again, I don't know if you've had Dart on the podcast, but you definitely should. He's awesome. This idea of people experience work itself as the product. So everything else becomes a feature or benefit of that core product of work, which means you can start to connect the end-to-end from the awareness and talent acquisition piece as your GTM right through to your offboarding and your win back and your advocacy at the end. And everything in between is all part of that single experience of work. And so obviously you've got, as you would with any product, you've got different users that are trying to get different things out of the product. So that's where the jobs to be done framework becomes quite helpful to understand what individual user groups and personas within your employee populace, what they are needing to get out of that work product. But ultimately it is a single view of this idea of work and what we're there to do and how we extract value and how we give value as a multi-sided work product. So I've said a lot of things there that someone with a bullshit buzzer could be like whacking. So we have those in our events. The jargon bullshit buzzers, just like buzz it, let us know if we've said anything that isn't making sense. But that's generally the three categories: the productization of HR as a service, the delivery of programs as product. The third category is people experience in its totality as the product.
And so at this point, you've worked with hundreds, thousands of people leaders now in the various formats, whether, it's through the advisory consulting work you do, through, the events you do. And these are pretty different. The three approaches that you just walked us through, like for the listeners, what's your advice on how to determine like what is the best fit for me? Like obviously there is like the highest, most elevated version of this sounds like it's, number 3, but that's not to say that 1 and 2 won't work. Right. And so Is it like what I can get my CEO to buy in on? Is it like the construct of how my organization is currently structured? Is it size? Are like smaller companies more likely to be able to go straight to 3, but larger companies, like my wife works for a 12,000 employee company, and I'm pretty sure they're doing path 1, where, they're starting to do some of the elements of PX as a product, but it's also still very much aligned with the center. They still have a center of excellence. They still have some of these kind of more traditional things. And so what is your advice?
Yeah, I think context is everything. So it's always going to, so I'm a design advocate, and at the heart of human-centered design is culture and context first. So that also exists whenever a company or people team is a shift to more product-led practice in the people function. It's always like, okay, first and foremost, what exists now? What's the state of readiness internally for change? What's the state of readiness at an executive level for change? Like, there's all sorts of things that need to be considered when it comes to the application. I don't think, and I want to be very clear on this, I don't think there's a one size fits all or one single best solution. I think what sits at the heart of it is why, in the first place, are you interested in shifting to this way of working? Is it because it's a cool thing to do and you want to talk about being a people product team? Or is it that you actually want to drive value for the business? You want to, as I've learned to describe it in a true product sense, do you want to solve employee problems and drive business growth? Is that what you want to do? Because if that's what you want to do, whatever we call it and however you structure it becomes secondary to, okay, what do you now need to know then? And what are the capability gaps and operational shortfallings in how you currently work that stop you from solving real employee problems and driving business growth? And I think that's the really important step back before you start thinking about how we do it, what we call ourselves, how we structure the team. It's fundamentally, are we focused on the right things, or are we still focused on how do we become better at servicing the business? Because that's a separate, outcome. So in fact, it's something I talk about a lot. It's like the question to ask is not how do we apply product principles to deliver better HR? It's how do we use product principles to solve employee problems and drive business growth? So that is kind of the anchoring to the conversation before you get into the right application.
You may have just answered the question that I was about to ask, but I think it was in our prep call, I shared that there seems to be more interest in Agile HR than ever before. I mean, we've been doing this podcast for 5 years, and it feels like in the last, let's call it year and a half, we've had 5 to 10 people on the show, or people that we've just met at events talk about how their people team is moving to more of like a PeopleOps as a product, or PX as a product way of working. And I think you stopped me and you were like, well, you gotta, if you're one of those companies, you have to watch out. Like, you have to make sure that it's not the theater of Agile. And I think the way you described it was that they're just mimicking rituals without the real mindset, or like directly tying it to like how we can make the business better. It's kind of like we're just doing these rituals to say we're doing PeopleOps as a product. And so tell me more about that. We didn't really have time to dive into that, but I thought that was an interesting comment that you made. Over the last, let's call it 4 or 5 weeks, we've heard a pretty clear theme. People teams are going hyper customized. From Andrew Golden's story about vibe coding his engagement platform, to Brandon Weber talking about how companies are moneyballing their healthcare spend, everything is becoming more tailored and more personal. So when we learned that's how Athena is building required compliance training, i.e., making the experience fit your teams and not the other way around, we were pretty blown away. Athena combines a comprehensive course library with AI to deliver employee training that actually looks and sounds like your team. You can start with Athena's out-of-the-box courses like harassment prevention that are trusted by organizations like Genesco, Zendesk, and Pinterest, then easily customize it as needed to match your culture without a ton of extra work. You can even upload your own policies, decks, or short prompts to get a custom course in any language in minutes. Athena connects to your HRIS, automates assignments and reminders, and brings everything together in one single platform, including an employee hotline, case management, and policy bot. With more than 3 million learners and a 93% approval rating, Athena proves compliance can do more than check a box. Compliance can build trust, reinforce values, and strengthen your culture. If you want to learn more, check it out at goathena.com/MPL. That's goathena.com/MPL.
Yeah, no, it was a steal from Chris Metcalf, actually, who is also someone that I'd recommend you having on at some point. I'm going to give you a whole long list after this. So Chris and I have spent a long time talking about this, and he described it as the theatre of Agile. Essentially what that is, taking rituals from Agile. Classic one is take a block of work and call it a sprint, even though we've done no sprint planning. We've not actually done any of the operational things to run a sprint efficiently, or we'll have a meeting at the end of a waterfall project delivery, but we'll call it a retro. Like, there's all these things where you can apply language, you can apply ritual to your existing way of working. And I don't even necessarily think it's deliberate, or I don't think people are doing it to deliberately like play out the theater of. They're just misapplying the methodology because they actually haven't gone deep enough into why it's even important to do it in the first place. So that's the whole idea of the theatre of Agile, is applying Agile rituals to waterfall practice, which happens most of the time. Actually, when you scratch the surface, most Agile HR teams are just doing that. There's Agile rituals on top of waterfall delivery. So that's I think it's a natural starting point. Like, so I don't say that to criticize. I think it's a natural starting point. And it's a good indication that people are interested enough to try something different. I always say, like, if we want people to think differently about HR, then we have to think differently in HR. So I think it's indicative of that shift towards, well, let's try something new, but not quite going all the way, learning how to execute, or again, like I say, critically understanding why it's important to do so. And I think what sits underneath all of this is the importance of really obsessing over problems and not solutions, because the typical HR approach is to deliver a HR initiative to the business. We'll conceive of, create in silo, we'll build in silo, and then we'll go and deliver end solution to the business, and then all scratch our heads as to, well, why is no one using it? Why is this not actually change anything? Or worse still, we had no idea what we were trying to change in the first place. Like, we didn't measure any baseline behaviors. This thing that we're launching wasn't linked to any measurable operational bottleneck or employee problem. It was just it's a HR best practice, so we should implement this thing. It's like, okay, well, maybe not. So these are the things that are fundamental. Like, before you get into shifting into HR Agile rituals and all of the things that come with it, you really need to interrogate the type of work you're delivering and why you're delivering it. And if you can't tie your work back to real, measurable, observable employee challenges and business bottlenecks, that are preventing growth and preventing performance and preventing progress, you really need to start there before you even worry about applying agile rituals. That's really what's that behind that statement.
So just resummarizing, my words, not yours. If the key driver of the type of PX as a product model that you implement, one of the three options that you mentioned earlier, is really like what you're trying to accomplish. Like, first principles thinking, why are you even considering doing this? And the important thing to avoid, just, implementing service level, like cosmetic changes, is kind of this theater analogy that I'm hearing, is where you're just, you're not actually changing, but you're adopting the vernacular and maybe some rituals. If the key thing to avoid that is like truly understanding the mindset, what is the biggest blocker in your experience with working with HR leaders that are different, points in the journey of understanding this kind of new way? Like, what typically is the biggest blocker from truly understanding the mindset and avoiding falling into the trap of just, implementing cosmetics?
The beauty of, I spend most of my time building for and focusing on startups and scale-ups, which means the mindset shift tends to be less of a problem because they're already operating in a fast-paced business that uses the same language and tooling. So it's more just an aligning to the way the rest of the business operates. Where you get the challenges in larger, more established HR teams and organizations of multiple thousands of headcount, because you've then got deeply ingrained HR practices. There's two sides of the challenge. There's what the business and employees within the business expect of HR, because they've been so used to experiencing HR as a service and that's what they expect HR to be. So that becomes a bit of an internal challenge to create space between what's expected from the employee populace, executive team, etc., and to shifting to deliver and work in a different way. That's one challenge. And then linked directly to that is the mindset of the HR leader, the HR practitioner, usually grounded in faulty beliefs about what they can and can't do, or why they should or shouldn't do certain things. So you've got both sides of the coin, like both grounded in this legacy expectation of what HR should be. So it's like cracking both of those nuts can be quite tricky. Juby, who I believe you have definitely had on the podcast before, Juby Yao, she's been a feature of all of our live learning experiences for the most part, and this sort of question comes up a lot. And Juby is for those that haven't listened to that episode or don't know Juby, she's a systems engineer turned chief people officer and ops legend, and was doing product-led people ops about 20 years ago before it was even a thing. And her response is, I've implemented this dozens of times and I've never once asked for permission. I think that speaks to the shift that's required at, the leader level, is that we are, and I've been guilty of this in the past too, we're very used to, as a HR function, asking permission or talking ourselves out of things we want to do because we either don't want to challenge the status quo, or that we're deep rooted to please, which I think is another issue within our profession, is that if you are aligned in some way to the people profession, you're probably higher in trait agreeableness because your default is to try and help others, which again causes its own barrier to change. So there's a lot of thrown in there, but the two main challenges are when you've got a more established HR infrastructure that is grounded in traditional practices and the Ulrich model, is breaking down the mindset of the business and how they engage with HR, and then being comfortable with HR being something completely different. And then you've got the HR team, HR leaders doing the same thing on their side. Like, is it okay for us to be something different? Who do we need to ask permission to do this thing differently? And what if it goes wrong because we're HR, so everything has to be perfect? And that's the big challenge. Like, it's that there's so much of this that becomes mantra, but it's mantra that you have to put into practice. And one of those mantras is progress over perfection. You have to get really comfortable with the idea that a lot of the stuff that you do is going to be imperfect, but you need to also have the practices in place to learn from those and communicate those and make sure that you're doing the work to improve. And every other business function does that without asking for permission, without any challenge, internally or externally. Like it's just normal. But HR has this, I think, precondition to perfectionism and to pleasing, which represents a challenge when it comes to product applied to PX, because you have to be comfortable that a lot of stuff is not going to work and that most things that you experiment and try don't work, and for good reason, in exactly the same way as that's true in product. So that's the big thing that sits at the heart of like, we'll apply the rituals, but we won't go all the way. That's why that happens.
That really resonates, makes a lot of sense. So I've shared the story on the show before, so I'll keep it to the abbreviated version. But in late 2023, I became obsessed with PX as a product after a year of having Jessica Zwaan's Built for People, a copy of the book sitting on our desk. We had interviewed her like a year and a half before. I was finally compelled to read it, and I got like 3 chapters in, and I was like, I emailed Jesse and I was like, you are a genius. Like, I haven't even finished this book, but like, you've got like a beautiful mind situation going here, because I have seen other iterations of this kind of work. And as I mentioned earlier, and no one has been able to bring it all together in an easy to understand kind of way. And so, shortly thereafter, I think it was Lars that pointed me to a cohort that there were only a few of them that Jesse and a gentleman named Matt Bradburn did. And I was part of cohort 2. And I think there were like 20 people in our cohort. Many of them are still like really close friends. Many of them, I immediately was like, Daniel, we have to have them on the show. We'll talk about them here in a sec. But I remember the two hardest things for the cohort in general to understand were like, how do I actually define the product? So you keep saying like work is the product, like, and there was like circle exercise where there was like the core product, the ancillary product, the tertiary product. Like, she used different words, but it was like, and I just remember all of us sitting there. We were in like a shared Miro board, and we were like, is it this? Is it that? Like, is it the job description? Is it like, what is it? What exactly is the product? So I remember that being really, really, really hard. And the other thing I remember being really difficult for the group in general was truly defining how you align the work the people team does with the business, because it is like, rigorous alignment, and, you shouldn't veer off that alignment. And if you do, that should be a red flag, and there should be someone on the team to call that out. And so I remember those two things being really, really difficult. And so like hearing you talk, it just makes a lot of sense. I don't know if that resonates with you at all and the work you've done with some of your cohorts, but that was my experience.
Yeah, I think the key message that I'd want to get across is it doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
It's really, like I say, when you boil it down, ignore all the other language. I've said this phrase several times in this recording already, and I keep saying it's like the emphasis is on solving employee problems and driving business growth. So if you can anchor all of your work to that, then that's good enough. That's good enough justification. And part of that becomes, how good are we at user discovery? Like, how good are we at actually identifying the real high impact problems that exist across the business, both from like an employee experience perspective, like things that are causing friction and preventing performance and engagement at an employee level, to the operational bottlenecks that we can solve, or at least contribute to solving as a people function. Like, if you're focusing on those things, what we call the product or how we define it becomes, again, secondary. So I think that's another thing I talked about, being a gateway. Like, this is part of what I do, is like, let's just strip back some of the language framework that sits on top of it and just focus on what we're trying to do with this, which is to very good at user discovery. Once we can identify real high impact problems, do we have a rigorous process for prioritization so that we can make sure that we are working on the highest impact things at the right time? Once we've done that, have we got a defined process for idea ideation, idea testing, idea development and design? How do we know the solution that we're coming up with works? Part of that is the co-creation process, which isn't just to find that. Co-creation isn't we have to design everything in constant conversation with our employees and end users. It's not that. It is just making sure that you are taking into account the end user and you really deeply understand the end user, and that once you have early solutions to test, you get them into the hands of your end user to give you feedback. So that's part of the process. And then you get to the sort of agile delivery, which is linked which is rather than waiting 6 months to deliver a program, what's a version of this, or what's something that we can create in the next 2 to 4 that creates some value for the end user but isn't complete, so that we can get that into the forum. So we've helped improve that situation for that end user, that employee group, that executive stakeholder. We actually improved it over this 2 to 4 week cycle, but we're not done. And we're going to use that feedback to then do the next phase of development, and you get that sort of iterative cycle. So again, ignore all of the product stuff that sits at the top at more of a strategic and philosophical level, and focus on how do we apply product, GTM, Agile, UX principles and methodologies to solve employee problems and drive business growth. Like that's what we're trying to do. And that's how you can then link the work directly back to impact. And you can say, we solved this problem over here. This was the baseline that we measured before. This is how we knew this problem existed and the impact it was having on the business. We did these things. We removed this bottleneck and we implemented this new thing over here. And the net result was an improvement on that baseline by 10x, which we can then tie directly back to a business impact. So it's that sort of reverse engineering the whole concept that is actually crucial, not what we call the product or what the product is.
I love that. One of the things, just quickly going back, and then we need to move on because of time, but one of the things that I thought was missing in the cohort, and I've shared this with Jessie, she agreed. In fact, I think y'all are friends, y'all have, she's referred people to you and vice versa, was like practical frameworks and playbooks. Like it just was like, it just didn't exist. And, we were talking more about theory. And so we're not going to have time to kind of drill into these, but for those that are listening and they're like, yep, I get it. Yep. Understand it, and they're looking for a little bit more, like, how can you get access to some of these playbooks or materials that you have? Because some of this is open source and shared. Like, how can our audience get more if they want to drill into this a little deeper?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, my newsletter is sort of built around the idea of sharing actionable frameworks and tools. So there's like 100 and something editions of that now, which probably 80 of them, because sometimes I just do some bigger thinking. Around 80 of them are literal practical frameworks that you can dig through and choose. Obviously the OpenOrg resource has also quite a lot of useful templates and frameworks in there. Increasingly, they're adding more and more that can be applied from a product perspective. You've got, I think it still exists. If you look up Marie Krebs, who, I don't know if you've had Marie on either, but she's also awesome. If you look up Marie Krebs, her and Lauren Gomez created a whole people product toolkit, which they open source on Notion, which is the toolkit they built internally at Build a Rocket Boy, a computer games company that they were building the people product team within. So that exists. Chris Metcalf, if you go to pxasaproduct.com, he very astutely grabbed that domain name, missed that opportunity. So Chris Metcalf, if you go to pxasaproduct.com, I think they've also got an open source section with different frameworks and playbooks. So the actual frameworks, tools, and playbooks are emerging. Obviously, I have my digital course too, but I don't want this to be a sales pitch for that. But it's exactly what that's for. Like, it's to take you from 0 to 1, to take you from this sounds like a good idea to I'm actually like a few hours in and I'm already implementing. Like, that's the whole point. So there's lots emerging out there, which is very cool to see.
Agreed. Okay, so now people they've got the frameworks. They have maybe like a starter kit, across all the different resources that you just mentioned, and now they need to get to work. And I feel like what's most helpful for me in these situations is being able to look at like 2 or 3 tangible examples of a person or a company or a team that's already done it. And it's also good to have examples from like different scale, like a startup versus a company like, I think it was TomTom that you were mentioning, that is much bigger. And so can you and I think another thing you mentioned was, it's never, even with these frameworks and the playbooks, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be exactly what the framework or playbook tells you need to build. It's going to turn into something that's unique to your company. And so, give us, showcase 2 people that are a part of your community that have done this really well and share their stories.
I'll give 2 a mention, but I know you've already had them on the podcast. So Frida Mocker at Sastrify, her implementation over the last few years has been great. And then Ness Monasquera, who's done versions of it at Miro and now Gorilla. So they're both awesome. So I won't talk about those because you've already had them on the show. So let's focus on the TomTom example, because that's an interesting one because of the relative scale. So I think most companies that have got far down the line with this are smaller scale. So startup, scale up, they're still in that product market fit and beyond stage of the business, sort of, 3 to 10 years old, still quite lean. So it becomes easier to translate this stuff into that environment. But TomTom's interesting because of their scale and their history. So for those that don't know TomTom, they're very hugely well known in Europe. So I don't know how well known they are in the US, but they are they were certainly in Europe the pioneers of satellite navigation. So initially that was obviously the hardware within cars. Now I think they do increasingly more on software side of things, but I think they still do hardware more in the sort of fleet and commercial space, I guess. They've been around for around 100 years, like a company that I might be overselling that slightly. Certainly decades. They've been around for decades. They've got 3,000 or 4,000 employee headcount. They have had deeply entrenched ways of working for a long time. You can imagine that, Ulrich and all of the traditional HR models that have gone over the last 3-4 decades have been part of their process. But over the last sort of 3 years, they've made a big shift into PX as a product. And I like the way they've done it. So Aga van Buren is the head of people product over there, currently on maternity leave. So shout out to Aga and congratulations. The way they did it was they took a phased approach. So rather than going, right, we're going to switch the whole HR operating model to this product-led model. What we'll do is we'll actually set up a people product function, and they will operate as a siloed part of the people function. So all they will do is deliver projects. We'll call them projects, but projects and products within TomTom's framework were the same thing. So a project was the delivery of an internal product. So going back to those 3 models that I mentioned, they were in model 2, which is the delivery of internal projects, programs as products. So they separated that out and they say, right, we'll put a separate headcount and resource into this people products team, and all they will do is look for those high potential problems to solve, and then they won't do any frontline HR. They'll literally just deliver those projects internally. So that is also a nice way to do it, in the sense that you can then show value through execution. You can solve quite a lot of problems at scale, and then you can start to then use the internal, as they do, their internal team capability to then upskill the wider people team and start transitioning more of the team into that way of working until it becomes the dominant approach across people function. So I quite like their approach to it. And that's an approach that you can, as a one-person people team, by the way. So if you're a standalone head of people, you can mirror that approach. You just go, right, rather than a separate team, then it's now my time allocation. So I'm going to allocate 20% of my monthly time to the delivery of people product projects, which means I'm probably going to deliver a lot less volume, but I'm going to make sure that the ones that I focus on are the most high impact. And again, as you deliver those, you can then start to talk and communicate that impact much more strategic level, which means you've gained free up more and more of your time to do that project-based product delivery internally. So I like TomTom as an example. It's a phased approach, but it was a very intentional approach. So we are going to do this, and we're going to create the space and function for it, and we're going to hire based on what we need to deliver that. So we're going to hire people that have done this before, like Katja Vincetic, also potentially a great guest. She was part of the people product team over there, who came from a very agile background and was a sort of natural to help upskill others in that field. So that's one approach. You've got the scrappy approach like Frida's. I mentioned Frida, but Frida, much smaller team. I think her people team is team of 3 at the moment. And they, again, did it in their own way, in their own scrappy way for experimentation. It was very cool actually for me to see her go through that process. But she applied a product approach to applying a product approach to go pretty meta on it. So it was like this iterative cycle of experimentation with ways of working within the team, doing proper retros and reviews, and then going, right, this worked, that didn't. That part of the Agile framework just isn't relevant for us. We can drop that. A daily stand-up is completely unnecessary. We don't need that. And just start to pull it around, break it down, and just focus on the bits. So they kind of ran like a sprint cycle on their ways of working and sort of evolved it over time. And then Lauren and Marie, I've mentioned them before, but Lauren Gomez and Marie Krebs, they helped popularize this whole movement because they were, Lauren was leading and Maria's part of the PX design function at Learnably, and they open sourced their whole ways of working at Learnably too, and got more and more people talking about and taking action on product-led projects internally. And I'll talk specifically about some of the things that they do to launch internal products. So at Barb, for example, it's a computer game company. So what they did was they had designed a new benefits platform based on, of course, good user discovery and getting that part right. But in terms of launching to the business, actually, this is a point to pause. Sorry, I'm just talking here. Hopefully we're okay on time. We're okay. Important point to pause. Like, building the stuff is not the end. That's the beginning. And so actually what you really need is to take that GTM approach to that. All right, now how do we get this into the hands of the end users? How do we activate them, make them engaged in the product, and how do then we retain them and make sure that they use this ongoing? Part of that is good launch comms. So one of my favorites is they were working in a computer game company. So they actually built on Canva, by the way. So they weren't game developers. They just built it using animation in Canva. But do you remember like the 90s, like Game Boy video game sort of animation? They built a quest using Canva that you then went on and you navigated through as this character, and you unlocked different benefits as you did the quest. So they create like an internal quest for employees to go on to unveil the new benefits that are available to them, which again, just thinking creatively, like how do we creatively launch our programs is also part of this. It's not just the design and build. It's like, how do we actually make people excited to use these things? Some things that we have to deliver and build as a HR people function aren't that exciting, but we can definitely do a better job of communicating the value. And another one of theirs, which is I won't talk specifics, but they created a fake employee internally. This was at a different company that they both worked at, but they created a fake employee who basically took over the Slack channels and was complaining about the incumbent HRS system. But what they were doing was they were quoting feedback they'd had from users, frustrated users of the HRS. So this fake employee was like, in their first week of onboarding, was just like hammering all the Slack channels saying, what is going on with this? I can't do, like putting all of that back into the point where it caused an absolute frenzy internally, like who the hell is this guy? And eventually they did a big reveal that said, hey, this employee actually isn't a real employee, but hey, he's been talking and using the language you've been using about our current HRS system. Here's the new one, and here's how it solves and addresses all of those problems. And they had once on the back of that launch, they had, I think it was in the high 90% information completion rate into the new HRS system because of that sort of like guerrilla marketing campaign internally. Now, look, that's culture and context specific. That's not going to be the right thing to do in all organizations, but it's about, that is not a HR thing to do. Like creating a fake employee and like absolutely hammering the live Slack channels. Bear in mind, the CEO didn't even know this person was fake, and most of the HR team didn't. So a couple of them did that were in part of the project, and one of the engineers did because they had to set them up with system access. That was it. So like top to the bottom. So that's not going to be right for all companies. Very fun, very creative, and it just gets you thinking about like, okay, if we were a marketer, if we were a GTM team, if we were taking this thing and we wanted maximum uptake and engagement when we launched it, what would we do? And it wouldn't be an email blast and one Slack message to say, hey, your new benefits platform's now up and running. Take a look when you get a chance, and then move on to something else, because that just isn't going to work. So part of it is in the design and build of products and solutions that solve employee problems and drive business growth. Part of it is in how do we communicate that? How do we make sure that the intended end users see it, know it exists, know how to access it, and that we can activate them. So we actually get them to take that first point of engagement, and they realize the value of that thing, so they use it again. So it's this connected process. So sorry, that was a bit jumpy all over the place.
No, it's love
I
it.
shared some interesting examples of practical application.
Well, and before we turn the corner, it's just always boggles my mind how quickly an hour, goes. But sometimes I feel like, I don't know if this hits for y'all, but sometimes I feel like there's not a lot of hope and excitement and joy in the people space. It's been a tough, 4 or 5 years. And And so I want to zoom out, right? So now we understand why, we understand how, we understand some of the what that people have done to implement this new operating system. But the fact of the matter is, if this did not work for leadership teams, if it didn't work for CFOs, if it didn't work for CEOs, it game over. Like
Mm-hmm.
this movement would be dead.
Mm-hmm.
And my last question for you is, what should the HR leaders expect on the other side? Like what are the positive things they should expect? What does Juby know? What is she so convicted about because she's seen the other side? Can you shed a little light on that for our listeners?
Juby is very convincing in all that she thinks, and brilliant. Juby was destined to succeed because Juby's Juby. But what does she know? She actually, I'm gonna take that example of that whole idea of not asking. So linked to this whole thing is this narrative of we deserve a seat at the table. We should have a seat at the table. We should have a seat at the executive table. Now, like strategically and operationally, I agree. I think an executive leadership team without the VP people, whatever they're called, the most senior people person around that table is one that isn't going to get the most out of the business and the people within it. It's a strange thing not to have that. But we can't expect it, because if all we're delivering is HR services to the business and support function, why would you have the seat at the table? So for me, what's on the other side is like if the senior people leaders of the future, of the medium and long term, wants to by default be at the executive table, and that's the position that they hold and that's the strategic influence they have, then we need to be able to deliver value and show how that connects to business performance. How many HR initiatives have we shipped and delivered, but what is the value of the work that we've delivered over X period, which we can directly tie back to business growth and performance? That's the key. So, I mean, Jessie has her maximize impact to the mission. There's other ways of phrasing it, but the idea is if you can't tie back your work to business, high priority business impact, ultimately that seat of the table is going to continue to elude you. And part of that is learning to communicate in the way that the other people at that table communicate with, because they do not care about your EMPS score. They don't care about your any of the metrics that we tend to report on, which are obviously often lagging and latent. It's like, actually, no, we solved this because we identified this business bottleneck. We did these actions to resolve and remove that, and the impact was 10x on this particular stat, which links to this one, which is keeping you up at night, CEO. Like that's the path to that seat at the table. So Juby knows that well because she has done that many, many times and is very unapologetic in the way that she goes about doing that. That's the reality of it. If the people person within the business is going to be a default member of the executive team, they need to evidence value. And I think it's shifting away from, like I say, HR and being the HR leader and thinking about how does the role of the people team connect people, process, and technology to drive business growth. I think that's like the trifecta that the most effective people leaders are going to nail, is connecting people, process, and technology, obviously, particularly in this AI. This is the first time I've mentioned AI. We're nearly an hour in. This is crazy. That's the true role. And the emergence of roles like Chief Work Officer and Chief Workplace Officer, which shift away again from people experience and HR to, well, actually, we're focusing on work. So the role is actually how do we drive performance and growth at a business level, rather than how do we deliver increasingly more HR initiatives, which are relatively low value and often are just because we need something to do, which isn't particularly useful or strategic.
Well said. I feel like that's the perfect point for us to end the conversation and move over to rapid fire questions. So we ask the same set of questions to every guest. Question 1, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to somebody starting in HR today?
Yeah, I would say be cautious of the playbook that exists. Feel free and feel enabled to forge your own path, and find a community of people that are thinking and working differently, and tap into that. And crucially, I'll repeat this again, whatever you're doing in your early career, make sure that you're solving employee problems and driving business growth.
Next question. If your team or wife, because I heard a rumor she's working with you now, gave you a
Cheers.
superpower nickname, what would it be?
I had to think about this one because it's one of those questions that's quite tricky. But I landed on Vision. Vision because Vision's an existing superhero from the Marvel franchise. I don't know if we've got any nerds among us, but I'm one. But I think because for myself, I'm very focused on change and storytelling, and how do we think about the future pragmatically, and how do we make the future possible through tangible actions. And I think that's pretty much what I do, is like imagine a future that could be possible and then try and connect the dots and enable people to build it.
I'm having flashbacks to I don't know if this show ever became popular outside of the US, but there was a show called That's So Raven.
It did, yeah. Sort of late 90s, early noughties. Yeah.
Yeah. I can just picture you like making the face, and then so anyways, yeah. That's a good nickname. Next question. If you could steal one strategy from another company, what would it be?
I would say the Sana, recently acquired by Workday. Congratulations. The Sana operating model, which is 666, which I love. So 6-year strategy, and they come together annually to make sure that's correct. But 6-year long-term strategy, 6-month operational big bets. So what are we going to deliver in the next 6 months that's going to get us closer to that 6-year strategy? And how do we break that 6 months down into 6-week delivery sprints, all aligned to achieving that goal, but very focused on what's most important now, because you have that 6-week cycle to prioritize and reprioritize. So I love that one.
I love that, but man, the number, that's spooky. 666.
Oh, it is.
Dang,
I'm not.
you ruined my pun, Daniel. I was going to say that's devilishly good.
Well, we're getting close to Halloween season,
We
so
are.
maybe it's fitting. Yeah.
All right, last question. You made it onto the show because someone nominated you, and we have sourced the vast majority of the people leaders that we've had on the show through the next question. Who should we have on next?
I've rattled off so many names in this one, so I'll try and pick
Well,
one.
okay, since you've already named so many names, if we could only have one, who's one person that we have to have?
I think right now, because I think that I'm just going to caveat. There's 2 people. Dart Lindsley would be great to talk to, but because he's a very high level thinker and he's thinking very deeply about this idea of people as a product, but that's more of like a high level thing. I think if you want to be operational and executional, I think speak to Chris Metcalf. So he is, he's got his Red Oak consultancy, and he's got PX as a product, as a cohort program, but he is a former senior product lead in Workday and Docebo, former head of people product at Primark, focus on people and culture, and he is doing amazing work to bring real product strategy into tangible strategy for people teams. So speak to Chris Metcalf, I would say, for sure.
Those are 2 great nominations. Last tradition of the show is one word or phrase close. Anything that's coming to mind for you. Could be one word, it could be a few. What do you got for us, Luke?
Definite optimism.
Ooh.
And that comes from, I can't remember what book it was from, possibly 0 to 1, I can't remember. But the idea of definite optimism is the future will be positive because we will make it so. So it's not infinite optimism, which is it will all just be fine. It's definite optimism. The future will be positive because we will make it so. We will build it.
I like that. I'm going to steal something Steven just said. Devilishly good. That's how I feel after this episode.
For real. I'm going to go with evolution. I think what we've discussed today is an evolution on what so many giants in our space evolved, on before and before that and before that. And without this kind of continued evolution, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here talking about these great new ideas and ways of working. And so I'm grateful for you, Luke, and your role in evolving the way we look at the people space, and as well as everyone else. Jesse, all the names we mentioned, there's so many people that have contributed to this and will continue to contribute to it. So thank you so much for joining us today. This did not disappoint, and it was worth the wait. So thanks for being patient with us.
Hey, no, same for me. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, gents.
Alrighty.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.